thousands evacuated as Mozambique is hit with its strongest storm in history. The eastern puma has officially been declared extinct. Microplastics are raining down from the sky. 1 million species threatened with extinction because of humans. It was 29 degrees near the Arctic Ocean this weekend as carbon dioxide hit its highest level in human history. When we see articles like these on the daily, it becomes pretty easy to feel overwhelmed, right? I think it's pretty normal to feel this way. We are in the midst of experiencing an ecological breakdown, a global existential crisis, a crisis which genuinely threatens the prospect of existing in the future. Clearly, an emergency. Now, in the state of an emergency, people tend to react in one of three ways. We either hope someone else deals with it, we panic to the point of a freeze, or we seek help from those who are knowledgeable on the situation. Perhaps I would dial 000, Australia's emergency service number. But this emergency can't be solved by pressing 3 numbers on a phone, making the bystander and panic to a freeze options much easier reactions, both of which I did. It all began last year, where I found myself in an English class, reading the first book I had read in years, called Climate Changed, a graphic novel which took me on the writer's personal journey through the science of climate change. It was too much to absorb in too little time. The official shutdown began. I remember coming home one afternoon, sitting Mum down on the couch. There's no point, Mum. We can't stop our globe from heating over the next few decades. And even if we were to reduce our emissions to the point in which the Earth could naturally absorb, we would have to reduce our consumption to the level of a low or even malnourished standard of living, which clearly isn't going to happen. It's a daunting prospect. I became frozen by fear. The updated graphs, statistics, news articles, videos kept bombarding me, and my frustration only grew towards what my past generations had gifted to us. Along the course of my shutdown, I stumbled upon the following question. What type of fundamentally flawed planet fails to take into account nature's services in which we depend on in order to survive? I was watching David Suzuki's legacy speech, an elder's vision for our sustainable future, when he poses this question to the audience. What type of fundamentally flawed planet, in other words us, fails to take into account nature's services? Service meaning the act of help or aid, free to the receivers, free to us. Let's take, for example, air. It resides in our bodies from our very first moment in this world until our last, never entirely leaving our lungs. Notice any similarities? Trees are rooted in the human respiratory system. We breathe in what they breathe out, and they breathe in what we breathe out. The only difference being that we need them in our ecosystem, they don't need us in theirs. Now, I'm sure all of you guys know this, at least I hope so, but I can't say that I even used to look at a tree with the appreciation deserved for such a crucial exchange. A character strength survey from a couple years ago already sensed this in me. I thoroughly remember receiving my least prominent character strength as the appreciation of nature and beauty, and then bragging about it. Yeah, isn't it just so cool when you don't appreciate what stains your very life? Man, how the hell did we get here? What qualities in us have allowed for this to happen? It was at this point that I realized it was actually qualities within me that I was becoming frustrated with. I was a part of that fundamentally flawed planet that failed to see itself as a whole. So I began to reflect on my relationship to our planet. I remembered when I would sit there with my ex-boyfriend. Hey Miles, can you see that ant? Oh, it's so cute, look at it. Oh, now you don't. He couldn't quite understand what was so funny about killing ants, but I valued a good laugh far more than a irrelevant ant's life. They seem too little to matter, too little to make a difference. But fascinatingly enough, despite their size, they actually are kind of important. They transport seeds to safe growing environments, help keep pest populations controlled, create nests which aerate the soil and recycle nutrients. Ants' everyday lives are ecologically crucial. So think about it. How many other tiny species are out there, all doing their own tasks every day with one collective goal, to sustain life? So, first off, maybe don't kill the ants, Meika. But really, I think there was more for me to learn from past Meika's actions. I was one of those people who would constantly tag their vegan friends in memes like this, who would, out of fear, frantically rush around the house, slamming shut all doors and windows at the sound of any flying insect, who would rather throw the food scraps in the landfill bin because the compost was too gross and smelly to open, who, when given the opportunity to read any book in the entire library, would read one written entirely in text messages about gossiping, who didn't like second-hand shopping because it was for old people. It's been a bit funny for some of my friends and family to see this process happen. After listening to Suzuki's question, my frustration with the outside world drew me within. Not because tackling climate change all of a sudden became a simple and easy task, but because my curiosity began to resurface in the sense that I was asking why a lot. Why aren't we acknowledging nature's services that we depend on? I realised I was at war with those ants because I seemed to be at war with myself. I began to see that a concerning amount of my actions were just copies of what other people were doing. Ask me why I held some of those values, and I wouldn't have been able to pick my brain for a legitimate answer, because those values weren't really mine. They were just this huge byproduct of all the profit-driven industries that rule my home culture. I think this is where our fundamentally flawed species had recruited me. So, what does my real place look like then? Simply, it looks like this. That's us. And I think this is quite a strange view because this is the first time, or one of the first times, we're able to see ourselves from the outside inward rather than ourselves outward. We see ourselves as a whole, as we need to see ourselves, because this is our place, our earth, our mother, mother of life. Not just my life, or your life, our life. And as humans, we have the gifted ability to be conscious of our existence and make changes to that life. Yet, I suspect that it won't take more scientific articles and facts for us to make changes to this life. Seemingly understanding the severity of our situation purely from an intellectual point of view doesn't necessarily generate a connection to it. But I, along with probably many others, have explored the bystander and panic to a freeze options quite thoroughly by now, and it's not helping anyone. So the third option is all we have left. But don't get yourself into a kerfuffle. It doesn't mean you have to chain yourself to a tree. Now I see that it's slightly ironic, me standing here today, saying that the only option is to do something, but not having shared a project in the typical sense yet. Just bear with me. 6 months ago, I was discussing our crisis with one of my favourite teachers, Mr. D. We were discussing how we move forward, how we cultivate change, and I was feeling pretty stuck with this thought. So he suggested to me to think about it like building a bridge. He asked, what is it made out of? How do we cross it? And how can we make it as short as possible? This suggestion only jumbled my thoughts more. The one thing I was sure of was that this bridge needed to be huge. So this talk came to mind. Look, a perfect opportunity to create a grander scale change. I have a group of listening ears and potentially malleable minds. With this thought, I also began to talk more with family and friends when it seemed like they were listening. I've had many conversations trying to politely convince friends why and how we should act on this crisis. But soon did I realise this wasn't really cultivating much change. So I did some intense reflecting on what I think has cultivated change in my life, and the first thing that came to mind were people, which is pretty funny because I've always struggled to see the impact of one person, of one ant. So, Mr. D, I think I might have missed your point. Maybe we are the bridge, and we cross the bridge by being the bridge ourselves, just like the ants do. Each individual doing their own part, contributing to the collective. Because, in a sense, we're all just big ants. So I've been asking myself a lot, what is my contribution to this bridge? What does my part look like? Is my shift to a plant-based diet enough? Is minimizing consumption and committing myself to staying educated enough? Well, from one perspective, it's not been enough to stop the largest coal mine in the southern hemisphere from just getting approved, Adani. But on the other, it's been enough for me to find my grounding, something I really need to remember to value. This journey has begun the learning of something quite difficult for me, focusing on my own path. While it's easy to blame and demand change from others, this doesn't gain much momentum. It's more important that we focus on our own path, on our own foundations, more than just our own words. Because personally, I really struggle to listen to a passionate climate activist who still chooses to eat meat. As the saying goes, actions speak louder than words. So what if we all took a moment to shift our relationship with just one element of this crisis? Begin with just one. Ask yourselves, what does my diet speak? Where do my skincare products come from? Are these practices I want to support? What is my child's education really teaching them? Are these lessons that I value? So tonight, when you're all thinking about how you want to build your part of our bridge, remember, this isn't just your life or my life. This is our life. And only can we make changes to the whole of life upon earth when we make changes through each and every one of our own lives. Because if there's one thing that those ants have taught me, it's that despite their size, their individual contributions are crucial, important, and impactful to communities both near and far. Thank you.